Good evening, Sukihotu. Welcome to another sharing. We are now resuming our Monday evening Dhamma sharing. And from now on, for the next couple of weeks, I will be doing Dhammapada Study, where we will examine the teachings of the Buddha that has been stated in the Dhammapada sayings, and looking at the stories and the Jataka's tales, so that we can examine what the Buddha, how the Buddha taught the disciples, and some of the stories behind what the Buddha was teaching. Now, before we proceed, I would just like to share with you this link. Please use this to download the presentation slides so that you can follow along. Today, the topic is contentment and tranquility. Basically, we're talking about how we can experience contentment when we are receiving something, and then how we can use that and cultivate tranquility. We will be looking at two stories mentioned in the Jataka tales and also in the Dhammapada. So the first, we will look at verse 249 and 250. So verse 249 basically talks about people who are not contented when they receive something. So here the Buddha made this statement where he declared, people give according to their faith, according to their pleasure. So what that means is that when somebody gives, he has certain confidence what he is doing, right? Who he's giving to and why he's giving that thing. So people have this confidence, and this confidence and this devotion, wanting to give, this is the meaning of that word faith. Faith is not blind faith. Faith here is confidence and devotion, right? Built on knowledge. So people give according to their faith and according to their pleasure. Here, pleasure is not sensual pleasure. Here, pleasure is talking about rejoicing, talking about being joyful of giving, so they feel good, right? So we will look at this key word here. Basically, it's from the word Pasanadi. Okay, so basically it means according to their pleasure, right? How they feel good about giving. So this is what the giver does. Then the Buddha went on to say, one who is discontented when gifts, food and drink are given to others will not attain tranquility either by day or by night. So here the Buddha really meant that here it's referring to a monk, but it could also be any lay person receiving gifts or seeing other people receiving gifts. Of course, monks don't often receive gifts other than robes, necessary requisites, and food and drink. So here the Buddha is using the term gifts, meaning that the necessary requisites, food and drink for the monks. So here the Buddha was preaching to the monks, so he's referring to the monks, but it can also apply to lay people about other things that we are receiving and when we see gifts given to others. So the Buddha said that when we are not contented, when we see other people receiving gifts, right, this means we will not be able to attain tranquility either by day or by night. We will examine these in closer details later on. We'll look at the story behind it first, okay? So this is verse 249. And of course, there is also a parallel verse, another verse, which is on the opposite side. So this is talking about a person who is not contented. So in verse 250, then the Buddha spoke about the other type of people who are contented. He says, one who has uprooted and eradicated discontent, absolutely destroyed it entirely, will attain tranquility both by day and by night. That means if we have let go, we have abandoned our jealousy, our envy, our conceit, and we rejoice when we see other people receiving, so we will be able to attain tranquility. Here, tranquility actually is referring to samadhi. That means this state of very joyful peace of mind. We will examine more deeply the actual translation later on. So basically, these are the two verses. We will examine the story behind it. The story behind these two verses is the story of a young novice monk by the name of Tisa. So the Buddha uttered these verses while residing at Jetavana Monastery, referring to this young monk, Tisa. He's a novice monk who had just joined the order not long ago. So he's a new young monk. So what happens is this Tisa is a person full of jealousies, full of envy. Tisa went around finding faults with gifts of any kind. And these two lay people, the householder, Anatta Pindaka, and also the female lay disciple, Visakha, these two are very generous, very who do a lot of meritorious deeds. They have donated a lot to the Sangha community. And they actually are very meritorious people who do a lot of meritorious deeds. And Tisa basically keep finding faults with whatever they give. Doesn't matter what they give. Tisa will not be contented. He will find faults with them. Right? So they give alms, food, and also robes and so on. So he frequently complained about the alms food. Right? And what happens is that when he receives food that is cold, then he say, "Oh, this food is so cold," and complain a lot about it. Now here it says whenever he received cold food in their refectory. Refectory is a term used to refer to the dining hall of a monastery. So if you go to a temple or a monastery where a lot of monks are staying, you go to the dining room, that is called the refectory. So whenever and monks normally only, when they're in the monastery, they only eat inside the refectory. They don't eat in their own kuti, or they don't eat everywhere else. They go to the refectory to eat, the dining hall. Okay. So when he received food that is a bit cold, he would complain about the food being too cold. Right? And whenever he received food that is hot, he would also complain the food is hot. I mean, he can never be satisfied. He can never be contented. He's always full of all kinds of complaints about whatever he received or other people receive. So whenever they gave little alms, that means the food is not a lot. Right? Sometimes from time to time, there are not many lay disciples coming to offer food. So the alms food is not a lot, so they have to share, and there might be limited portions. Okay. And then he would blame the giver, the lay disciples who are offering the alms, and say things like, "Why do they give so very little?" He would be complaining it's too little. And when they give more, when they give a lot, so this is usually on full moon or new moon, right? Then you have a lot of lay disciples coming to the temple or monastery offering a lot of food. Then there is an abundance of food. Whenever there is an abundance of food, he would blame the lay disciples offering the alms and say, and even make silly excuses like, "I suppose they had no place in their house to put the food." So it's kind of very ungrateful person, this young monk Tisa. And he would also say things like, "Surely they should give monks only so much required to support life. Too much food. This is absolutely wasted." So he's complaining when it's too little. He's complaining when it's too much. He's complaining when it is cold. He's complaining when it is hot. So nobody really can please him. So he was making all kinds of complaint. Not only he was complaining, he was also bragging a lot. So when he liked to brag about his own village, his kinsfolk. The word kinsfolk basically referred to the relatives and friends from the village he came from. So he basically started bragging about how good his own relatives and friends are back in his own village. Right? He would say things like, "Oh, the house of our kinsfolk is a veritable tavern for all the monks who come from all the four quarters." So he's saying his own friends and relatives back in his own home village, they are very generous and they are very good at giving a lot of good stuff to the monks who come to visit. So he was actually bragging about his own relatives and friends. Okay. So he sang a lot of praises about his own kinsfolk, relatives and friends. Now, the other monks heard all this and they were a little puzzled, this monk, why is he behaving like that? So when the other monks observed that Tisa was finding all kinds of faults with the gifts, whether the gifts he received or the gifts other people receive, or even the good work that other people do for the monks, they thought to themselves, okay, let us find out the truth about this novice monk Tisa. So they wanted to find out where he came from. Are his relatives really so generous as he claimed? So they wanted to find out more about that. So they started to ask him, right? As a brother monk, they would say, brother, where do your kinsfolk live? And of course, Tisa would brag and say, oh, in such and such a place, such and such a village. So he told them where his home village was. So what happened next is very interesting. A small group of monks got together. Of course, they can only do this with permission of the elderly monks who are in charge of them. So this small group of novice monks got permission to go to the village to find out more and to investigate about the kinsfolk of Tisa, his friends and relatives. Are they really that generous, right? So who is this guy Tisa and where he came from? So they decided to travel to his home village, of course, without his knowledge. So they went on. The villagers there were kind and generous, no doubt. And when the group of young monks, novice monks, arrived, the villagers, of course, provided with seeds and food in the rest house. They were very kind. They offered the young monks a place to sit down and offered them alms food and so on. So the monks decided to ask the villagers, right? And ask the villagers, there is a novice monk named Tisa who came from this village and had retired from the world. Who are his kinsfolk? Now, this term, retired from the world, simply means a person who has given up household life and departed from household life and went into homelessness to become a monk. Right? So this is really referring to a person who has given up household life to become a monk. That's what this term retired from the world meant. So they asked the villagers who are the relatives or the kinsfolk of this novice monk by the name of Tisa. And interestingly, the villagers replied. They said, there is no youth who has left any gentleman's household. That means their father's household. There is no young man who has left the household in this village and retired from the world. What are these novices saying? So these villagers are curious. They say there's no such a person from this village who had gone into homelessness and become a monk. No such person by the name of Tisa. And then the villagers went on to say, and then the villagers went on to inform these novice monks, Reverend sirs, we have heard of a certain gatekeeper's son who traveled with a company of carpenters and retired from the world. Without doubt, he must be the novice you are referring to. So in fact, the villagers were saying that there was such a youngster, a youth by the name of Tisa, who actually was not from this village. He was just a son of a group of traveling nomads or whatever, travelers. And gatekeeper here, I'm not too sure exactly the real occupation, but basically here it could be referring to guards, jaga, people who jaga the pintu, people who are in charge of the store. So people who are in charge of a confined lodging place, that means in charge of a building, to make sure the right people are allowed to enter and so on. So such a person in charge is called a gatekeeper. So there was such a gatekeeper's son, the son of such a gatekeeper, who went and traveled with a group of traveling carpenters. And basically, these are people who go around doing work from village to village. And they have heard that such a youngster had retired from the world and become a monk. So they were quite sure that these novices were referring to that young monk. So in other words, Tisa did not come from the village, did not have real relatives living in that village. He was just the son of one of the gatekeepers of a group of traveling carpenters who came to this village, and then they moved on, and eventually this son of the gatekeeper became a monk. So that's what the villagers told the novices. So when the young monks learned that Tisa had no kinfolks of significance in the village, that means he didn't really have any important relatives or any famous person living in that village. He was just son of a gatekeeper, just a small timer, you know. So when they realized that, so they returned back to the monastery in Savatthi, and they informed other monks what they had discovered about Tisa. And they said, "Reverend sirs, Tisa goes around chattering without sufficient cause." That means Tisa was bragging without any real, without any evidence, without anything to support what he was bragging about. Right? So finally, word got to the Buddha. The monks reported the matter to the Buddha because the monks were very disciplined. Whenever they hear some wrongdoing of any monks, they would inform the Buddha. So they went and informed to the Buddha what they had discovered. And of course, the Buddha knew, and the Buddha basically told all these young monks, he says, "Monks, this is not the first time Tisa had gone about uttering words of disparagement and empty boasting. In the previous state of existence, also, he was a braggart." So in other words, the Buddha knew the past life of Tisa. In his previous lives, he was also the same, bragging, boasting, and so on. See, it's important to understand. You couldn't fool the Buddha in this case because the Buddha had what we call three knowledges, tevijja. Three knowledges. The first knowledge is the knowledge of his own past lives. He could see his own past lives, how it came to be before he became the Buddha, and he could see his past lives going back aeons, going back countless lives. The second divine knowledge the Buddha had was the ability to see other people's past lives, how their karma came to be, and how they got reborn from life after life. So the Buddha saw that Tisa in his past lives was also a braggart. Just to complete the tevijja, the third knowledge is the Buddha knew how things come to be, the rising and falling, right? So the important thing here is the Buddha could see the past lives of Tisa and told the young monks that in his past lives, Tisa was also bragging and boasting. So therefore, in his present existence, the present life, he was still the same. He hadn't changed. Okay. Then, then in response to a request from the monks, right, the Buddha related the following story of the past. Right? So the Buddha explained a certain story and says, one may boast ever so much living in a faraway land, but sooner or later, others will follow and spoil it all. In other words, if you travel to some faraway place and you start to tell people stories and you make up stories and brag and make up lies to talk about your past, about where you came from, but they are untrue. Now, if you start doing that, you know, that means you travel to another place and you start telling the people you know in this other place where you came from, and it's a whole lot of nonsense, you know, a whole lot of lies and bragging all kinds of things, sooner or later, somebody will reveal the truth. You can't get away with it. Sooner or later, people will find out. Right? So, and then the Buddha went on to advise the young monks, having related that story. So I won't go into the details about what the Buddha, all the stories Buddha was talking about. But basically, Buddha made this declaration, and he said, monks, if any man is annoyed because others give either little or much, or coarse or fine food, or because they give nothing to him when others were given, such a man will not attain tranquility of mind, which is samadhi, or insight, which is wisdom, right? Insightful wisdom, panya, or will not attain the path, marga, will not be able to practice the proper Eightfold Way, will not attain the paths, the marga, and will also not attain the fruits, which eventually the most supreme fruit would be nibbana. So basically, this is what the Buddha stated. A person who continues to have some form of discontent, some form of envy, and lacking in contentment and lacking in gratitude of receiving, that person will never experience peace of mind. That person will never gain wisdom. That person will never be able to follow the teachings of the Buddha properly. And eventually, that person also will never be able to attain the fruits of the practice. And this is really what the Buddha said, and that led to that verse. Okay, so that led to the verse where the Buddha explained the two sides of the same coin: people who are discontented and people who are contented. So basically, people who are discontented, the Buddha said, one who is discontented when gifts are given to others will not attain tranquility either by day or by night. And then people who are contented, one who has uprooted and eradicated discontent will attain tranquility both by day and by night. So in other words, here that we have to learn how to eradicate and uproot. That means abandon and give up and relinquish all forms of discontent, all forms of ungratefulness, right? And otherwise, we will never be able to find peace of mind, right? Of course, the more detailed explanation is in this previous statement here where the Buddha said these things, okay? So these are the words of the Buddha in according to the commentary on the Dhammapada verse number 249 and 250, okay? So moving on, I will then show you another verse that the Buddha used to explain contentment. This, I think, a lot of people know. This is a very popular, very famous verse where the Buddha said, health is the highest gain. Contentment is the greatest asset. The trustworthy are the best companions. Nibbana is the most supreme bliss. Here, the Buddha was basically stating the most important acquisitions in our life, the most important attainments in our life. First is that whatever we do, we are trying to get something out of what we're doing, you see. When we do good, we are hopefully achieving something. We know what we're doing. This is very important because when you do good, always know what you are doing and how it is benefiting the people. So here, we are talking about profiting from our efforts. And the Buddha basically stated that health is the greatest profit we can get from what we do day to day. So basically, everything we put into our daily life, health is the most important gain, the highest gain. Immediately, this is talking not about long-term attaining Nibbana, but this is talking about on a day-to-day basis, take good care of your health. Health is the highest gain, the greatest profit, right? Contentment is the greatest asset. Here, the Buddha was referring to people accumulating wealth, accumulating assets. So one of the important things you must accumulate is this spiritual understanding that leads to contentment. And this spiritual understanding is really a form of being grateful when you receive something. Realize that what you receive, you should be grateful for. And that leads to contentment. And therefore, this is an asset to you. This contentment is something that belongs to you. You know this, right? You can keep it and you can experience this. You can benefit from this. So contentment is the greatest asset. We'll take a look at the story behind it in a moment. I'll just explain the verse briefly, okay? And then the next part, the trustworthy are the best companions. Here, the Buddha was referring to relationships. Right? So the relationship we have with other people. And basically, when we have relationship that is built on trust, that relationship is very valuable. That relationship is most meaningful, most productive, most beneficial. So in other words, make sure that you are with people whom you can trust. And if it is people you cannot trust, then stay away from them, right? No point mixing with people you are always doubtful of, because then you are experiencing doubt continuously. Let go and walk away from them, right? Stay away from fools. That the Buddha has been teaching that. And basically associate with wise and good people. And this will lead to a trustworthy relationship. So this third part is talking about relationship, okay? So therefore, these are the three benefits. The first one, highest gain, is talking about profiting from our effort. The second one, the asset, is talking about accumulating so-called wealth, but this is spiritual wealth. Contentment is a spiritual wealth, not talking about physical wealth. And the third one is talking about our relationship built on trust. So we will then have the best companions. And finally, the fourth one is talking about the practice, right? The practice of the teachings of the Buddha and the highest attainment that will lead to the greatest happiness in life, right? That highest and most supreme bliss, that is Nibbana. Nibbana is the highest and most supreme bliss. So basically, this is really what these four verses mean. That the things we do on a daily basis, we can profit from it, the highest gain. We can accumulate the asset, which is the greatest asset. And we can build good relationships, right? So this is really what this means. Now, there's a very interesting story behind it. So let's examine the story. This is the story of King Pasanadi. King Pasanadi actually is not a very smart person, not a very wise king, but he was a good man and very generous, simple. So in other words, he's a very simple guy, right? So, and very generous, very simple, and fully in support of the Buddha's sasana, in support of what the Buddha was teaching, in support of the Sangha community, and constantly he was offering all kinds of alms and requisites for the monks. So he was very valuable to the Sangha community at the time during the life of the Buddha. So while residing at the Jetavana monastery, the main monastery where the Buddha normally lives if he's not traveling around a lot, so the Buddha was referring to King Pasanadi, right? So there was a time when King Pasanadi indulged in overeating and grew grossly obese and lethargic. So Pasanadi, of course, you know, being a king surrounded by all kinds of wealth, a lot of servants and abundance of food. So he started indulging in overeating and having a very comfortable, luxurious life. And he started to really get very fat, obese, and lethargic. So One day, after breakfast, of course, he had a very heavy breakfast, and you know what happens after you had a very heavy meal. You tend to get a bit sleepy. So this is what happened. And he was in the presence of the Buddha. And while in the presence of the Buddha, he was getting so drowsy, he couldn't shake off his drowsiness. He was almost about to fall asleep all the time. But he was very mindful that he was in the presence of the Buddha. He didn't want to fall asleep in front of the Buddha. But he was overcome with a desire to sleep. He really couldn't stay awake very much, constantly dozing off and trying very hard to stay awake. But at the same time, he dared not lie down to sleep, because if he did that, it would be very disrespectful to the Buddha. So he actually knew that. He was very devoted to the Buddha and very respectful. So he tried to stay awake. So he sat down on one side, trying to sit down and sit up and listen to the Buddha, but he was dozing off. Right? And the Buddha noticed that, of course. And then the Buddha, of course, went up to him and said to King Pasanadi, right, did you come, great king, before you were well rested? In other words, after you had such a meal, did you just come straight to see the Buddha without taking a rest first? Of course, after a meal, we should sit back, relax, and allow ourselves to kind of rest a while before we start sitting at a meeting or being in the presence of an important person. So the Buddha knew that and asked him, did he take a rest? Of course, he knew that this King Pasanadi did not take any rest. Okay, so King Pasanadi replied, oh no, Venerable, but I always suffer greatly after eating a meal. Of course, the Buddha knew it wasn't just a normal meal. He was eating big, great meal. He was really indulging in overeating grossly. And the Buddha knew that. So the Buddha wanted to help him and teach him. So then the Buddha said to Pasanadi, great king, overeating just brings such suffering. So the Buddha was very straightforward and very frank and told him and stated this, made this stanza. That means made a declaration to King Pasanadi. He says, if a man gives way to indolence, eats too much, spends his time in sleep, and lies and rolls about like a great hog fed on grain, such a simpleton will endlessly be reborn. Okay, so here let's take a look at the important words that were translated. Indolence. Indolence simply means wasting time doing nothing. Right? Eats too much, overeating, right? And spends his time in sleep. So in other words, when you eat too much, you tend to sleep more, or sometimes you get very lazy. So here it's referring to a lazy person who sleeps a lot during the day and lies and rolls about like a great hog. Hog is a pig, fed on grains. That means a pig that had just finished eating, lying around, rolling around. That's what pigs in the pig farms do after they had heavy meals, you see. So if a person is doing that, right, such a simpleton. Simpleton means a person who is quite ignorant, knows very little. A person who is ignorant of knowledge and practices. So such simpleton will endlessly be reborn. That means he will remain in samsara forever. He will never be able to escape samsara. He will always be reborn life after life. So this is really what the Buddha told King Pasanadi. And basically, it is a warning to King Pasanadi that you must get out of this overheating habit. Otherwise, you will never get a chance to practice the way or the path to awakening. So the Buddha kept advising him. So sometimes the Buddha, of course, the Buddha never used very harsh words on the king, being respectful to the fact that he was a king. But the Buddha was stern, was strict. So the Buddha was admonishing. Admonishing here refers to being strict to a person, telling the person off when the person does something wrong. So after admonishing the king with that stanza, right, the Buddha then continued, great king, one ought to observe moderation in eating. For in moderate eating, there is comfort. So here the Buddha was very straightforward. Tell the king, you have to cut down on your overindulgence in eating. You have to be moderate in eating, because then only you will experience comfort. And the Buddha went on to declare a stanza for King Pasanadi to remember. So, and admonishing him further, the Buddha gave the following stanza for King Pasanadi to memorize. Right? If a man be ever mindful, if he observe moderation in taking food, his suffering will lessen, or will be lessened. Right? He will grow old gracefully, preserving his life in comfort. So here the Buddha wanted Pasanadi to be reminded of this. Every time he felt like overeating, then the Buddha wanted King Pasanadi to remember this stanza, so that he can, on remembering this, the king would be able to stop overeating. So this is like something that the king should constantly recite, right? But the king, of course, King Pasanadi, you have to realize King Pasanadi had a very simple mind. Even though he was a king, he was not a very brilliant person, not an intellectual, not a very smart person. Not that he was dumb, just that he was not very street smart. He was not he was not very intellectual. Okay, but the king was unable to memorize this stanza. So you could say he had difficulty trying to remember what the Buddha was teaching him, especially, you know, even when the Buddha gave him this stanza. Okay. So the Buddha instructed the nephew of King Pasanadi. So it so happened the nephew, Prince Sudassana, happened to be standing nearby. Right? Already, in fact, probably Prince Sudassana was one who was like attending to the king. Right? Every time the king needed something, Sudassana would be the one organizing it. So all the kings had a very trusted person next to him to do these things. So apparently Prince Sudassana is such a person, attending to the king, just like Venerable Ananda was attending to the Buddha. So Prince Sudassana was attending to the king, happened to stand nearby. So now the Buddha realized that the king was unable to memorize the stanza. So he instructed Prince Sudassana, memorize this stanza, right? So Sudassana then asked the Buddha, Venerable Sir, after I have memorized this stanza, what shall I do with it? Okay. Of course, then the Buddha explained how he could use this stanza each time he saw King Pasanadi overeating. So every time the king eats his meal, just as he is about to take the last lump of boiled rice, you must recite this stanza. The king will understand its purport and will immediately throw away that lump of rice. In other words, you have to watch King Pasanadi eating. So when King Pasanadi had finished and enough food, if he continued to take one more bite, you must recite this stanza so that to alert the king, remind the king, give up, stop, you know. And there were actually a lot of instructions the Buddha gave, because what happens is that when the king finished his bowl of food, he would then instruct his servants to make another bowl, you know. So part of the instruction was to tell this Prince Sudassana that as soon as the king finishes enough food, you know, you should prevent him from getting the servants to cook more food for him. So recite this stanza so to remind the king. And the Buddha went on to instruct Prince Sudassana further how to prevent the king from overeating. So there were a lot of little instructions. We won't have to go into it. The important thing is that the Buddha gave Prince Sudassana the authority to remind the king by reciting that that stanza, and then helping the king to stop overeating. Now, the king actually is very obedient to the Buddha. It's just that he had difficulty controlling himself. So if Prince Sudarsana was reminding him that the Buddha wanted him to stop overeating, the king actually would be very disciplined and stop eating. But he needed reminding. That's what it is. So Prince Sudarsana's role was to remind the king. The king actually is very obedient and disciplined to what the Buddha taught, just that he had difficulty remembering, he had difficulty following. He needed to be reminded. As I mentioned earlier, he's not a very bright person, not a very smart person, right? So both evening and morning, whenever the king ate his meal, this Prince Sudarsana, the nephew, would recite the stanza just as the king was about to take the last lump of boiled rice. That means as the king ate to the bottom of the bowl, there is the last bite. Just as the king was about to take that last bite, that's the time, take the last bite of that bowl, that's the time Prince Sudarsana would recite the stanza and remind the king, this is it. Don't eat anymore, that kind of thing. So that he won't give instructions to the servant to cook another pot for him. So this is what Prince Sudarsana did. And of course, the king obeyed. The king realized this is the Buddha's instruction. So the king actually is a very obedient person in this case. Okay. And every time the king heard that stanza recited, he gave away 1,000 pieces of silver in alms. So in other words, the king was appreciative that every time he was reminded, oh, stop overeating, he remembered, this is what the Buddha told me, this is what the Buddha taught me, and what the Buddha wanted me to do. So he was very generous. He appreciated so much. So he gave away 1,000 pieces of silver, of money, for alms offering to the monks, as in gratitude of the fact that the Buddha was helping him to cut down on overeating. So he is a very appreciative person, a person who learned contentment. He learned gratitude. He realized that the Buddha was helping him, and he was very grateful. Pasanadi was a very good person, very good king, just that he was not very brilliant, not very bright. He could easily be fooled. In fact, there are a lot of stories about him being fooled by a lot of people. Okay, so the king contented himself with a pint pot of boiled rice a day. That means it was just one pot is enough, right? Don't eat more. Never exceeding that amount. So he promised to himself, this is all I will take, and that's what he did. Very disciplined, but he just needed reminding by his nephew. Right? So after some time, right, he became very happy. He became very jovial, and he started to lose weight and lean, very fit. And he slimmed down because he was no longer overeating. So this is wonderful. He was realizing the fruits of his discipline to the teachings of the Buddha. So one day the king went to pay his respects to the Buddha, and he at that time the king was already quite slim and fit and healthy, you see. And having saluted, pay respects to the Buddha, said to the Buddha, "Venerable Sir," and he was very happy, you see, very joyful. He says, "Venerable Sir, now I am happy. Once more, I am now able to follow the chase and to catch the wild beasts on horseback. I used to quarrel with my nephew, but recently, however, I gave my nephew my own daughter, Princess Vajira, to be his wife." So he was actually very appreciative, so appreciative of even his own nephew. He used to quarrel with his nephew because every time he gave his nephew certain instructions that the nephew felt was not smart, the nephew would advise him and he would get upset and they would quarrel. But now he doesn't quarrel with him anymore. He listens to the nephew because the nephew is now reminding him of the Buddha's teaching. So he realized that the nephew is doing a good deed for him. And he was so appreciative of his own nephew that he offered his own daughter, the princess, to be the wife of the nephew. So this is a wonderful thing, you see. And then he went on to say, my quarrels with my nephew have ceased. And for this reason also, I am happy. The other day, a precious stone, the property of the royal household, was lost. But recently, it was found and returned to my hand. And for this reason, I am also happy. So in other words, his own material wealth, he had certain jewels and jewelry or precious stones, something that he valued, material wealth. He lost it, he couldn't find it, and then suddenly it was returned back to him. So he became very happy. So this is really referring to this accumulation of wealth. So in this case, Pasanadi was relating to the accumulation of his material wealth. Right? And the king went on to relate the many improvements he experienced after taking the Buddha's advice. So in actually, it was a very long-winded thing. The king went on and explained so many things, all the wonderful benefits he was getting, right, because he followed the Buddha's advice. Firstly, not to overeat, and he became very contented and grateful to the Buddha for helping him. Okay. In fact, we go back to this. I think this is interesting just to say, okay, if you look at the first paragraph in the middle, it says, I am now able to follow the chase to catch wild beasts on horseback. See, a lot of kings in many countries, not only in Sri Lanka or India or England or Europe, one of the things they indulge in is they have a group of servants and noblemen. Then the noblemen would ride on horseback and go chasing after wild animals to hunt as a hobby. See, they do that a lot, right? So, or to chase after animals, or go to the elephant park and so on. So when he was very obese and lethargic, he was not able to do that because he was too fat. He couldn't even climb on top of the horse to ride on the horse. And he would easily get so tired when they ride out, so he would not be able to follow the other noblemen on this animal chase, right? So now he was able to do it. So he's actually now become very fit and very healthy, okay? So he related all these wonderful benefits of improvements that he had experienced now, and he was very grateful to the Buddha. His health had improved, his assets had grown, his relationships with his companions became more trusting, and he was able to follow the teachings of the Buddha more attentively. This is wonderful. So in other words, here it's talking about his improvement in health, talking about the assets, the material wealth that he was accumulating. It had grown. And talking about the way he treats people and the people close to him, his own nephew, for example, the relationship became more trusting. And he now was able to spend more time listening to the Buddha's teaching and paying attention. So he was gaining so many things in so many ways, right? He was very appreciative. So the Buddha replied, "Great king, health is the greatest blessing one can ask for. Contentment with whatever one has received is the greatest wealth. Confidence, the best relative. But there is no happiness that can be compared with Nibbana, because Nibbana is the highest and most supreme happiness, most supreme bliss." So this is really the Buddha's words to King Pasanadi, explaining that we should take care of our health and we should be grateful and contented with whatever we have. And we should build relationships centered around trust. And finally, we should then understand teachings and practice. So basically, health is the highest gain. The greatest profit you can get from your daily effort is to take good care of your own health. Contentment is the greatest asset. You can accumulate all kinds of material wealth in the world, but the spiritual wealth of being contented, being grateful, that is really the greatest asset you can have. And having people you can trust, friendships, relationships that are trusting, they bring you the best companions. And of course, when it comes to practice, then Nibbana would be the ultimate attainment, the highest and most supreme bliss. So this is really the reason behind this verse 204. So basically, I have covered these 3 verses, and they relate to being contented, contentment, and it leads to happiness. Contentment leads to happiness. All right, so going back to the first verse, now we're going to listen to a chant. I am very grateful, very grateful to Venerable Indaratana for being able to recite these chants.
Tadhati viyata sandham yatha pasadanam jano tantayo mangku bhavang va paresang pana bhojani naso diwaranting va samading adiganchati yasansa cetang samuncinnang mula gancang samuhatang savi diwacaranting ca samading adiganchati arogya paramalabha santunthi paramang danang viswasa paramanyati nibbanang paramang sukhang.
I'm very grateful to Bante for being able to chant this. So we have covered these 3 verses, right? In summary, the first one talks about people who are not contented, and they will not be able to find peace of mind, whether by day or by night. That means in their sleep also, they will be having all kinds of dreams. The second verse deals with the fact that if you are able to abandon your envy, your jealousy, your discontent, and cultivate gratefulness and be contented, and you will be able to find peace of mind, tranquility, whether by day or by night. Okay. And finally, the best advice from the Buddha is that when you do things on a daily basis, do it for the benefit of good health. That is the first thing. If you think about all the things you do during the day, 24/7, the most important thing is to take care of your health. Because if you are not healthy, you can't do everything else. If you are not healthy, you will have difficulty having peace of mind. If you are not healthy, you will have difficulty practicing the teachings of the Buddha. If you are not healthy, you will have difficulty enjoying good relationship with your companions, right? So health is really the highest gain in everything you do on a day-to-day basis. So make sure that you take good care of your own health. Contentment. So if you're able to cultivate peace of mind, this contentment, this gratefulness, gratitude towards everything you receive, then you will actually have this spiritual asset of peace of mind. Right? And of course, build relationships that are trusting. Stay away from the fools and cultivate good relationships. I noticed there is a question about having co-workers who, I noticed there's a question from some of you, one of you, about having co-workers you can't trust. So I'll come to that in a moment. But here we're talking about on a daily basis, everything you do, help yourself by building good relationships with people you can trust, and stay away from the fools and associate yourself with good and wise people, right? And people you can trust. And finally, of course, when you practice, the ultimate, the highest attainment, the most supreme bliss is really Nibbana. This is the ultimate. Of course, it's not something we know we can do tomorrow or within this lifetime. We got to keep practicing at it, right? Don't give up your spiritual practice. So this is the basic advice of the Buddha. Take care of your health. Be contented with whatever you have or don't have. Make sure you build good relationships with people you can trust and stay away from the fools. Associate with people who are good and wise. And finally, practice, practice, and practice. Follow the path, right? So this is really the advice of the Buddha that we should remember always. So I hope you have benefited from this. That comes to the end of my sharings. So please don't forget to download this file. The slides, you can follow along. All right, so we put an end to this. Okay, now let's do some sharing of the merits. We have spent this last 1 hour together and enjoyed this very trusting relationship with good companions, Kalyana Mitras, and the people that are sharing the same interests in the pursuit of learning the Dhamma, the teachings of the Buddha. So we have, by so doing, we have accumulated a lot of good merits. And we also know around the world, a lot of people are still suffering, continue to suffer from the effects of the coronavirus pandemic. Even though businesses are opening, they are opening not because it is safe. They are opening simply because they have to allow the economy to rebuild. So there is no choice. So despite opening up, there are still a lot of problems. A lot of people will continue to suffer. We are the fortunate ones who are able to get together and share the Dhamma in accumulating these good merits. Let's share our merits with the people who are suffering. Let's put our palms together and let us now recite this together, sharing our merits. We dedicate the merits we have acquired from sharing the Buddha Dhamma to all beings affected by the coronavirus pandemic around the world. May suffering beings be suffering free. May the fear-struck fearless be. May grieving beings shed all grief. May all beings find peace and relief. By the grace of the merits we have acquired, may we never follow the foolish. May we follow only the wise until we attain the highest and most supreme bliss of Nibbana. Idang me nyatinang hotu sukhita hontu nyatayo. Idang me nyatinang hotu sukhita hontu nyatayo. Idang me nyatinang hotu sukhita hontu nyatayo. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you very much. Have a good evening. And for those of you who, from America, have a very good morning. And those of you in Europe, have a very good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Please join us again next Monday, same time.